The modern world promises instant connection and endless choice, yet it has created a parallel epidemic, the crisis of delay. We are all complicit in this quiet sabotage. It is the phenomenon of procrastination, a force far more destructive than simple laziness. It is not a lack of desire, but a profound disconnect between our intentions and our actions. This book is an investigation into that disconnect, and a guide to its most powerful, counterintuitive solution. It centers on a single, radical principle: do the hard task first. Imagine a world where your most important work is completed before the day truly begins. A world where the mountain you dread becomes a hill you've already summited by noon. The opening hook is simple, yet intensely relatable. We begin with the familiar weight of an impending, difficult task. It is the tax form staring back from the desk, the challenging conversation we push off, or the complex project proposal. The easy tasks beckon like sirens, offering a temporary, false sense of productivity. We answer emails, organize our desktops, and even clean the house, anything to avoid the cognitive strain of the hard task. This avoidance, however, creates a shadow debt. It multiplies stress and ensures that the most meaningful work is performed under the crushing weight of a deadline. The core mystery we will unravel is why we do this to ourselves. Why does the brain default to comfort, even when comfort guarantees future pain? We explore the psychological mechanisms, the ancient wiring, and the cultural forces that make us put off what matters most. The philosophy of "do the hard task first" is a complete overhaul of this pattern. It is a psychological martial art. It reclaims control from the limbic system, the part of the brain that cries out for immediate gratification. By front-loading our day with the task we dread most, we achieve a cascade of positive effects. We leverage the energy of a fresh mind against the highest friction point. We build immediate momentum. The resulting liberation, the sheer mental space created by conquering the major challenge, is the reward itself. This is more than a productivity hack, it is a framework for living a life defined by accomplishment, not avoidance. We are setting out to prove that the path of most resistance, when chosen intentionally and early, is the path to least long-term regret. This is the story of how to end procrastination, not through heroic willpower, but through disciplined, strategic action. To understand the solution, we must first deeply understand the subjects involved in the conflict: the procrastinator, the task itself, and the inner battlefield of the brain. Our key subject, the procrastinator, is not inherently flawed. They are, quite often, high-achieving individuals with immense potential. Procrastination is often a defense mechanism, a dysfunctional coping strategy for deeper issues like fear of failure, fear of success, or perfectionism. We profile several case studies: the brilliant entrepreneur who can't launch, the meticulous student who misses deadlines, the creative professional paralyzed by the blank page. These profiles illustrate that the problem is systemic, not an isolated personal failing. Their common thread is a misalignment between their self-image and their daily actions. The second subject is the hard task. We define this term clearly, as it is often misunderstood. A hard task is not necessarily the longest task, but the one with the highest activation energy. It is the task that is ill-defined, requires deep focus, involves high stakes, or forces us to confront potential judgment or inadequacy. It is the task that your brain instinctively labels as threat rather than opportunity. The difficulty is often more emotional than logistical. We dissect how to accurately identify the real hard task in any given workload, distinguishing it from merely complex or tedious administrative work. The final, and most critical, subject is the brain itself. The battle is fought between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system. The prefrontal cortex is the executive function, the planner, the rational decision maker, the visionary. It understands future rewards. The limbic system, home to the amygdala, is the ancient, emotional core. It screams for safety, comfort, and immediate reward. When we face a hard task, the limbic system perceives the discomfort, the uncertainty, and the potential failure as a threat. It hijacks our attention with distraction, prompting us toward easier, safer, and more gratifying activities. This neurological dynamic is the engine of procrastination. The do the hard task first strategy is a deliberate act of frontal lobe dominance. It is a commitment to override the brain's instinctual safety signal with a calculated, higher-order decision. By framing the action not as an enormous burden, but as a small, immediate moment of disciplined engagement, we effectively starve the limbic system of the control it seeks. This reframing is the foundation of the entire approach. The central mystery of procrastination is the logical paradox: if we know delay causes pain, stress, and poor results, why do we continue to delay? The core problem is one of temporal discounting, a concept explored in behavioral economics and psychology. Simply put, we drastically undervalue future rewards and overvalue immediate comfort. A small, immediate hit of pleasure, scrolling on a phone, watching a video, feels more real and powerful than a large, abstract reward in the future, a completed project, career advancement. The pain of starting the hard task is immediate, and the reward is distant. The brain's simple calculation errs on the side of avoiding immediate pain. This is the tyranny of the present self over the future self. The procrastinator acts as if they will be a different, more capable, less burdened person tomorrow. They mortgage their current stress to their future self, believing the transaction will somehow be easier later. It never is. We examine the role of emotional regulation in this problem. Procrastination is not primarily a time management issue. It is an emotion management issue. The hard task triggers negative emotions, anxiety, frustration, self-doubt. Procrastination is a mood repair strategy. We avoid the task to avoid the feelings associated with it. The immediate relief is powerful and reinforces the negative cycle. Avoidance leads to temporary relief, but long-term anxiety. This is the cognitive trap. The temporary relief is a powerful positive feedback loop. We dissect the concept of structured procrastination, where one avoids the hardest task by doing many other, slightly less important, but still productive tasks. While this may look like activity, it is still a form of avoidance, a distraction from the task that holds the highest value. The core mystery, therefore, is rooted in self-deception and the brain's pursuit of emotional equilibrium. The solution must interrupt this cycle. It cannot rely on the motivation that avoidance drains. It must be a simple, non-negotiable rule that bypasses the emotional calculus entirely. The hard task first principle serves as this non-negotiable rule. a pre-commitment strategy that defeats the emotional avoidance before it can take root. It shifts the focus from feeling like doing the work to simply doing the work. The crucial discovery that unlocks the hard task first strategy is the principle of task friction and the 5-minute rule. The major clue arrived from observing the moment people actually begin their hard tasks. The highest barrier is the initial moment of starting, not the duration of the task itself. Once a person is engaged, momentum takes over, and the task often feels less daunting than the anticipation of it. This led to the concept of activation energy in task management. It is the psychological and physical effort required to initiate the work. This initial friction is the force that the procrastinator seeks to minimize. Our discovery is that to beat procrastination, you don't need a huge motivational reserve, you just need enough energy to overcome the initial friction. The 5-minute rule is the practical application of this clue. The rule states that you must commit to working on the hard task for only 5 minutes, and absolutely nothing more. The critical insight here is that the task of starting for 5 minutes is psychologically different from the task of completing the project. It lowers the emotional barrier to entry dramatically. It makes the task seem small, trivial, and harmless to the limbic system. The 5-minute commitment is usually enough to engage the prefrontal cortex and initiate a state of flow or focused engagement. In the vast majority of cases, once 5 minutes are complete, the individual will continue working because the friction is gone and momentum has taken over. We examine the neurological basis for this. The brain releases dopamine not just upon completion, but upon anticipation and initiation of a rewarding behavior. The act of starting, of taking that first disciplined step, provides an immediate, reinforcing dopamine hit. This small, initial success builds the positive feedback loop that avoidance destroys. Another crucial discovery is the concept of decisiveness precedes clarity. Procrastinators often wait for the perfect mood, the perfect idea, or the perfect environment. The hard task first principle, married to the 5-minute rule, forces a decision to act, which then generates the clarity and motivation necessary for the work to continue. The clue is that the feeling of motivation doesn't precede the action, it follows the action. The simple act of beginning is the critical leverage point. This turns the entire motivational paradigm on its head, shifting the emphasis from passive feeling to active, non-negotiable behavior. The do the hard task first philosophy, while a modern psychological tool, has deep historical and biological roots. Its origins lie in ancient principles of self-mastery and the biological imperative of resource management. Historically, this principle is often framed as "eat the frog," a metaphor attributed to Mark Twain, who famously advised, "Eat a live frog first thing in the morning and nothing worse will happen to you the rest of the day." The context is one of emotional and cognitive labor. The frog is the hardest, most repulsive task. The advice is ancient wisdom distilled: confront the source of maximum dread immediately to liberate the mind for the rest of the day. We trace the philosophy through Stoicism, where the practice of premeditatio malorum, premeditation of evils, encouraged confronting and planning for the worst-case scenario. By facing the psychological discomfort of the hard task first, the Stoic achieves a state of mental resilience. The modern context involves the overwhelming stimuli of the digital age. Today's distractions, notifications, social feeds, and endless digital rabbit holes, are engineered to maximize the immediate reward/comfort loop. This technological context has dramatically amplified the difficulty of doing the hard task first. The ease of digital distraction provides an escape route that was not available in previous generations. The hard task is now competing not just with a tidy desk, but with an algorithm designed to capture and hold the brain's attention indefinitely. Biologically, the context relates to evolutionary resource allocation. In a primal environment, the hard task might be hunting a dangerous animal. The brain's instinct is to conserve energy and avoid risk. Procrastination is, in a way, the brain's ancient survival mechanism misfiring in a modern environment. It saves cognitive energy by avoiding high-effort, high-risk endeavors. The hard task first principle must, therefore, be seen as a cognitive technology designed to hack this evolutionary bias. It leverages the short-term motivation and focus we naturally possess at the start of the day. This is the principle of willpower as a finite resource. Willpower is strongest early in the morning, before decision fatigue sets in. By tackling the hardest task when our cognitive resources are at their peak, we are maximizing our chance of success and minimizing the possibility of our willpower being depleted by trivial decisions. The context is, ultimately, the acknowledgement that the human mind is not perfectly rational, and therefore, self-control requires an intelligent system, not just brute force. The do the hard task first approach is not the only theory of productivity, and understanding the conflicting theories helps to clarify its power. One major opposing theory is momentum-based productivity, which suggests starting with small, easy wins to build a feeling of efficacy and momentum before tackling the large tasks. The conflict arises because, while easy wins feel good, they often consume the peak mental energy that should be reserved for the high-friction task. They also risk the procrastinator mistaking mere activity for genuine accomplishment. The stakes escalate when we consider the long-term impact of choosing an easy-first approach. The hard task, the high-value work, looms larger and larger over the day, breeding anxiety and consuming mental bandwidth even when not being worked on. Another conflicting theory is energy matching, which advocates aligning tasks with fluctuating energy levels throughout the day. While valid for routine work, it can become an excuse for the procrastinator, who will continuously postpone the hard task until a mythical, perfect energy state arrives. The hard task first strategy is a direct challenge to this, demanding a deliberate, front-loaded expenditure of energy. The stakes are highest in the realm of identity. A consistent pattern of procrastination erodes self-trust. The individual learns, implicitly, that they cannot rely on their own promises to themselves. This erosion of self-efficacy is a deep psychological wound that transcends simple missed deadlines. Conversely, consistently conquering the hardest task first builds an identity of competency and reliability. It creates a positive feedback loop that strengthens the prefrontal cortex and reduces the influence of the limbic system. The escalating stakes in the professional world are tied to cognitive load. When the hard task is pushed to the afternoon, the brain is already tired from a day of decision-making. The cognitive effort required to shift gears and engage in deep work becomes exponentially higher. The quality of the work suffers, stress hormones rise, and the entire endeavor is a struggle. This contrast is the ultimate proof of the method. the struggle to start in the morning is a fraction of the struggle to finish under duress in the evening. The theory we propose demands a high-stakes, all-or-nothing engagement early in the day to guarantee low-stakes, successful execution later. In the journey to conquer procrastination, the point of no return is the moment the hard task first principle becomes an inviolable habit, moving from an intentional choice to an automatic behavior. This transition is the true measure of success. We define this moment as the establishment of a morning task anchor. The hard task is not merely slotted into the morning, it becomes the anchor around which the entire day is built. All other activities, checking email, meetings, small administrative tasks, are strictly forbidden until the first, non-negotiable block of hard work is complete. The point of no return is crossed when the thought of checking email before doing the hard task feels physically wrong. It is a restructuring of the brain's priority system. To achieve this, we introduce the concept of task preloading. The night before, the user must physically and mentally prepare the environment for the hard task. This includes setting out the materials, opening the necessary files, and identifying the exact first sentence or action required. This preparation dramatically reduces the activation energy needed in the morning, making the start as automatic as possible. The emotional point of no return is passed when the procrastinator accepts that the feeling of discomfort at the start is not a signal to stop, but a signal that they are doing the right thing. They learn to interpret the dread as an indicator of the task's importance, not its impossibility. This reframing is a critical psychological leap. It transforms an avoidance signal into a motivational cue. We explore the role of accountability in solidifying this habit. Whether through a public commitment, a work partner, or a simple internal tracking system, introducing an element of accountability makes the cost of not doing the hard task immediately painful. This pain of social or self-accountability then outweighs the short-term pain of starting the task. The entire process is a commitment to the person you want to be. The moment of no return is when the person who starts the hard task first is no longer an idealized future self, but simply who you are. It is the moment of definitive identity change. The halfway point of our investigation reveals a surprising and critical twist. Procrastination is often a symptom of unrecognized competence, not a lack of it. The major revelation is that many hard tasks are put off because the individual unconsciously fears the implications of excellence. If the procrastinator performs the hard task perfectly, the stakes are permanently raised for their future work. The success creates a new, higher standard, and the fear of not meeting that standard next time leads to avoidance now. Procrastination becomes a subtle, self-sabotaging mechanism to protect against the pressure of consistent success. The twist is that the avoidance is not a reflection of laziness, but a twisted response to the anxiety of maintenance. This requires a fundamental shift in the application of the hard task first principle. The focus must change from completion to consistent effort. The goal is not to finish the entire project in one heroic morning, but to make non-zero progress, every single day. This minimizes the pressure of perfectionism. It makes the task a process, not a performance. The midpoint twist also reveals the power of the completion myth. Procrastinators often believe they must find the motivation to complete the entire hard task before they begin. This is paralyzing. The solution is to break the hard task into the smallest possible unit of irreversible progress. The morning task is no longer, write the proposal, but outline the first section for 20 minutes. This twist redirects the psychological goal from an overwhelming finish line to a manageable starting block. Furthermore, we discover that the most effective way to start the hard task is often to start in the middle. If the beginning is too daunting, choose the easiest, clearest, or most engaging section of the hard task and start there. This immediately builds momentum without confronting the highest cognitive friction of the task's initiation. The momentum generated by a middle start can then easily carry the worker through the more difficult introductory phase. The revelation is that true discipline is not a rigid adherence to a rule, but a flexible, intelligent strategy that understands and outmaneuvers the brain's internal defense mechanisms. New evidence from neuroscience and behavioral psychology reinforces the hard task first method, primarily through studies on decision fatigue and flow states. The psychological impact of conquering the hard task early is a massive reduction in ambient stress. Ambient stress is the low-grade, persistent anxiety that accompanies the knowledge of an unfinished, high-stakes task looming. By confronting and making progress on the hard task, this stress is immediately and dramatically reduced, freeing up cognitive resources for the rest of the day. This is measurable in reduced cortisol levels throughout the afternoon. The new evidence centers on the concept of cognitive switching costs. Every time the brain switches from an easy, low-value task, like checking email, to a hard, high-value task, there is a significant cost in time and mental energy. The brain takes time to fully re-engage in the deep work. By performing the hard task first, we minimize this switching cost. We leverage the brain's ability to settle into a deep, uninterrupted flow state. The initial momentum of the morning carries the deep work forward with minimal friction. Another piece of evidence relates to learned helplessness. Chronic procrastination teaches the brain that effort is futile, leading to a sense of powerlessness. The hard task first strategy is the direct antidote, building a sense of learned mastery. Each successful morning creates a data point for the brain: I can start and execute difficult things. This is the fundamental building block of self-efficacy. The psychological impact is a transformation of the relationship with discomfort. The feeling of mental resistance, which once signaled retreat, now signals execute. This is achieved through a deliberate practice of pattern interruption. When the inevitable urge to procrastinate surfaces, the disciplined individual has a pre-planned, automatic response: engage with the hard task immediately. This repeated act rewires the neural pathways, making the avoidance response weaker and the execution response stronger. The hard task first principle effectively inoculates the day against the debilitating effects of decision fatigue and the crippling belief that one is incapable of tackling challenging work. Throughout the history of productivity, there have been subtle and overt attempts to suppress the truth of the hard task first principle, often disguised as promoting balance or self-care. The most insidious suppression comes from the culture of busyness. Modern work culture often prioritizes visible activity, emails, meetings, immediate responses, over deep, contemplative, and difficult work. The easy task, which is often reactive and outwardly visible, receives immediate social reward. The hard task, which requires solitude and sustained focus, is often seen as a secondary priority. This cultural pressure encourages the postponement of the hardest work in favor of tasks that generate immediate, though shallow, validation. The truth is suppressed by the false promise of multitasking. The belief that one can effectively juggle high-friction and low-friction tasks simultaneously is a myth that destroys the focus required for the hard task. Attempting to do the hard task while intermittently checking an inbox ensures that neither task receives the necessary cognitive attention. The hard task first strategy demands a ruthless singularity of focus, which conflicts with the prevailing, distracted work environment. Another form of suppression comes from the productivity porn industry. This industry promotes endless lists of complex systems, obscure apps, and biohacks that distract from the simple, fundamental truth: just start the difficult work. The complicated system becomes a form of metaprocrastination, where the individual spends time planning to be productive rather than simply being productive. The hard task first principle is suppressed because it is too simple, too uncomfortable, and too effective, leaving no room for complicated, marketable systems. The core of the suppression is the human desire for zero discomfort. We seek a life and a workflow where starting a challenging task is entirely pleasant. The truth is that the hard task will always involve an element of initial psychological discomfort. The hard task first principle accepts this discomfort as inevitable and chooses to experience it early, rather than deny it and suffer its multiplied effects later. The path to ending procrastination is hidden behind the noise of easy distractions and complicated, unnecessary systems. The active phase of implementing the hard task first strategy is a deliberate pursuit of the difficult and a confrontation with the brain's natural resistance. The pursuit begins with a commitment to a single metric of success. The day is only considered successful if the non-negotiable hard task block was completed. All other achievements are secondary. This singular focus eliminates the mental wiggle room that allows for structured procrastination. The confrontation occurs in the first 30 seconds of waking. The procrastinator must confront the limbic system's automatic plea for comfort. This requires a pre-planned, almost ritualistic morning sequence. This sequence must bypass conscious thought and rely on established habit. The moment of confrontation is defeated by the rule of immediate execution. There is no debate, no checking of news, and no decision-making. The individual must move directly from waking to task initiation. This is the principle of making the start automatic. We examine techniques for confronting external distractions, treating them as hostile invaders of the hard task block. This includes turning off all notifications, moving the phone to another room, and using physical barriers to enforce focus. The confrontation is both internal and external. Internally, the pursuit involves confronting the negative self-talk, the voice that whispers, "You're not smart enough," or "You have more time." The response is a learned countermantra, "Just 5 minutes," or "Progress, not perfection." The pursuit is also a confrontation with the myth of creative primacy. Some argue that difficult, creative tasks require waiting for inspiration. This is a false premise. The hard task first principle asserts that inspiration follows labor. By engaging, the mechanical action of working generates the necessary creative flow. The confrontation is the daily refusal to be ruled by feelings, and instead, to be guided by conscious, rational priority. It is a commitment to the painful but necessary act of self-discipline, understanding that the small pain of starting yields the great pleasure of accomplishment. The pursuit ends when the action becomes effortless. With the commitment to do the hard task first in place, the final, crucial pieces of the system fall into place, transforming a tactic into a sustainable lifestyle. The first piece is the principle of task contraction. Since the most important work is done first, the rest of the day gains tremendous flexibility. The deadline for the hard task has, effectively, already passed. This allows the individual to contract the time spent on less important work. When the most valuable work is completed, the pressure to be perfect on administrative tasks diminishes, leading to faster, more efficient execution of those tasks. The second piece is the effective use of the procrastination impulse. Instead of fighting the urge to avoid, the individual redirects it. When the brain screams for a break from the hard task, the break is not a distraction, but a planned shift to a trivial, contained task. Answering 2 non-urgent emails or organizing a folder becomes the reward for a solid block of hard work. This redirection leverages the brain's need for novelty and easy wins without sacrificing the momentum of the main project. The final, essential piece is the power of cumulative advantage. By making irreversible progress on the highest value task every morning, the compound effect of the hard task first principle becomes overwhelming. A small, daily advancement on a major project yields massive progress over weeks and months. The small, manageable effort becomes the engine of enormous, visible success. The system is self-reinforcing. Early success fuels self-trust, which reduces anxiety, which makes the next start easier. The procrastinator is no longer fighting a downhill battle but is consistently on the high ground. The entire system is a masterclass in psychological leverage. Use the peak energy of the morning to conquer the highest friction point, and use the resulting mental freedom and momentum to manage the rest of the day with calm authority. The primary conclusion revealed through this investigation is that the end of procrastination is achieved not by managing time better, but by managing attention and pain tolerance. The truth is that the hard task is merely a symbol for the psychological discomfort inherent in growth, creativity, and high-value work. Procrastination is an attempt to escape discomfort. The solution is the disciplined embrace of it. The do the hard task first principle is a system for systematically confronting and normalizing the feeling of initial difficulty. The final truth is that there is no magical cure, no secret trick that makes hard work easy. There is only the deliberate choice to front-load the difficulty. This is the central tenet: the pain of discipline is always less than the pain of regret. By choosing to experience the required discomfort early and on your own terms, you prevent the exponentially greater suffering of panic, poor performance, and self-recrimination that comes from delay. We reveal that the hardest task is not the one you dread, but the one you postpone. The very act of avoidance makes it harder. The primary conclusion is a redefinition of the relationship between comfort and success. Comfort is the enemy of high achievement. The brief comfort of avoidance guarantees prolonged, high-intensity discomfort later. The brief discomfort of immediate engagement guarantees prolonged, high-intensity freedom later. The principle is a simple, elegant algorithm for success. Identify the highest friction task, attack it with a 5-minute commitment at your peak cognitive time, and build an identity around the non-negotiable completion of that task. This approach bypasses the need for motivation, which is fleeting, and relies instead on system, which is reliable. The true self-help is self-command, and the command is simple: do the hard task first. This is the bedrock of a productive and peaceful life. The aftermath of adopting the hard task first principle is a profound and lasting transformation in personal and professional life. The legacy of this approach is the creation of a life defined by intentionality. The individual moves from being reactive, constantly responding to the demands of the environment and the distractions of the brain, to being proactive, setting the terms of engagement with their work. This is the ultimate freedom provided by discipline. In the modern context, the hard task is increasingly the one that requires deep, focused attention, the cognitive skill most eroded by the digital ecosystem. The principle has a vital, modern tie-in to the fight against the attention economy. By dedicating the first block of the day to the highest value work in an environment free of distraction, the individual is effectively reclaiming their attention from the forces designed to commodify it. The hard task first principle becomes a firewall against digital distraction. We look at the ripple effects, the legacy, of this habit. It improves sleep quality because the mind is not consumed by the low-grade anxiety of the looming task. It improves relationships because energy is not drained by internal psychological conflict. It creates time, as focused effort is vastly more efficient than distracted, anxiety-fueled activity. The ties to modern leadership are also clear. Effective leaders do not delegate the most difficult decisions, they confront them early. The personal practice of hard task first mirrors the strategic thinking required for high-level organizational success. The legacy is not just about completing tasks, it is about building a mental fortress against the constant pressures of a distracted, high-demand world. It is a commitment to prioritizing impact over activity. The self that emerges from this practice is fundamentally calmer, more confident, and more capable of handling the inevitable challenges of life. This investigation into ending procrastination concludes with a synthesis of the hard task first strategy, acknowledging the lingering, human mystery that remains. The summary is straightforward. Procrastination is an emotional regulation problem masquerading as a time management problem. The solution is the structured, non-negotiable confrontation of the highest friction, most dreaded task at the peak of one's cognitive day. This practice leverages the neurological principles of activation energy, minimizes cognitive switching costs, and systematically builds an identity of self-efficacy. The method is simple: identify the frog, preload the workspace, commit to a 5-minute start, and protect the morning work block as inviolable. The outcome is profound: the replacement of ambient stress with consistent momentum. The lingering mystery, however, is the enduring fragility of human intention. Even with a perfect system, the temptation to revert to the path of least resistance remains. Why do we constantly seek comfort, even when we know that discomfort is the price of true growth? This mystery suggests that the journey is never truly over. It is not about eliminating the urge to procrastinate, but about consistently winning the first, most important battle of the day. The final message is one of empowerment through humility. Acknowledge the brain's flawed, ancient wiring. Do not rely on motivation or willpower alone. Rely on the system. Rely on the commitment to that single, decisive act: do the hard task first. The book concludes by offering a final challenge: today is the day the system begins. The hardest task on your list awaits its final, definitive confrontation. The choice is the final and most meaningful measure of self-mastery.